A very good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to our webinar on the Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index 2025, assessing countries' preparedness to leverage GKI for digital economies and governance. The GKI Readiness Index 2025 report evaluates the readiness of 75 countries to develop and utilize geospatial knowledge systems which are vital for digital economies and effective governance. I am 𝐊𝐞𝐲 𝐇𝐢𝐠𝐡𝐥𝐢𝐠𝐡𝐭𝐬, Associate Director for GKI at Geospatial World. It is my privilege to guide you through 75 minutes of insight, evidence, and forward-looking discussions. We have a comprehensive agenda for you tonight, including a keynote address, an informative presentation, and an engaging discussion with a global expert whose experience spans 3 decades. Now, before we start this, I want us to have a vision of a better tomorrow. Together, let us imagine a world where cities anticipate floods before the rain begins, where farmers apply water and fertilizer with pinpoint precision, saving resources and maximizing yield, and where supply chains dynamically reroute themselves in real time during disruptions, all powered by an invisible thread of location intelligence weaving through every decision. This, my friends, is not science fiction, but the promise of geospatial knowledge infrastructure, or GKI, the foundational nervous system of tomorrow's digital societies. As we make this journey together tonight, you will realize that the transformation GKI ushers in is measured across 5 pillars: infrastructure, industry ecosystem, institutional capacity, user adoption, and policy landscape. Now, you may ask me, what is GKI? The definition that we have is the geospatial knowledge infrastructure provides a comprehensive blueprint for integrating digital economies, societies, and citizens with geospatial approaches, data, and technologies, aiming to deliver location-based knowledge, services, and automation expected in the fourth industrial revolution. GKI outlines the progression from traditional SDIs to integrated knowledge-oriented ecosystems. It is anchored in UNGGIM's Integrated Geospatial Information Framework. Now, why is GKI important? Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure, or GKI, is vital because it transforms raw spatial data into actionable knowledge that powers decision-making across governments, industries, and society. In today's fourth industrial revolution, GKI integrates geospatial data, advanced analytics, and automation to deliver real-time insights essential for addressing complex challenges like climate change, urbanization, and public health. It provides the digital backbone for smart cities, precision agriculture, disaster response, and supply chain optimization. Across the globe, geospatial knowledge infrastructure is powering real-world transformation. In Brazil's Cerrado, IoT, drones, and satellites drive precision agriculture, boosting sustainable yields. Dubai's digital twin harnesses 5G and AI to optimize urban living and energy use. Japan employs advanced spatial modeling for wind energy development, balancing sustainability and growth. In India, PM Gati Shakti is integrating real-time GIS and predictive analysis to revolutionize transport connectivity. Singapore's AI-powered logistic and 5G tracking cuts emission and delivery times. This is GKI, already shaping smarter and safer futures. Now, why is GKI 2025 so important? The Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index 2025 benchmarks 75 countries against 5 pillars such as infrastructure, industry ecosystem, institutional capacity, user adoption, and policy landscape to identify each nation's capability to leverage location intelligence for competitive advantage and enhanced public service response. The 2025 index places United States and the United Kingdom and Germany at the forefront of spatial readiness. However, global fragility driven by inflation and geopolitical tension poses a significant threat into the geospatial market. Now, I'll introduce my keynote speaker. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce her, Ananya Narayan, Vice President of Consulting at Geospatial World. She specializes in geospatial strategy, digital infrastructure, and policy advisory, with extensive experience shaping technology convergence, socioeconomic transformation, and governance through data-driven research and strategic insights. She will be delivering the keynote address on the importance of GKI readiness in national development. And now
Thank you.
over to you.
Thank you so much, Oishik. That was a wonderful introduction to what geospatial knowledge infrastructure is and how we as an organization, along with our partners, have conceptualized the transition from moving from data to knowledge. I think if you look at historically, we have been talking about how data is the new oil, but with the concept of geospatial knowledge infrastructure, here we are talking about how knowledge is at the center, at the foundation of data-driven decision making, and how that transforms towards building a safe and sustainable future. Before we begin, I would request my colleagues to please share my presentation. I have a brief and short presentation which talks about Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index, but more from a context of why it is important, what is the current socio-economic scenario that we are looking at, how did the GKI as a concept come into being, and what exactly is Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index. So before we get into the Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index, it is very important for us to understand what is the geospatial and space industry market outlook. Often when we look at the kind of sectors from an economic standpoint, we don't see geospatial or space as a sector. But today, with the kind of adoption that is taking place in the market, geospatial and space industry, they have found themselves to be a very strategic and tactical sector in terms of nation building, in terms of focus areas by national governments. And what this has led us to believe is that the geospatial industry, encompassing GNSS and positioning, GIS and spatial analytics tools, Earth observation, which comprises of satellites, drones, aerial imagery, sensors and scanners, inclusive of LiDAR and radar, all of these technologies today, they shape how data is being collected, how data is being processed, and how that data is being converted into knowledge frameworks. When we look at this industry, it is we estimate at Geospatial World that it is going to be a 1.2 trillion opportunity by 2030. But what is interesting is, something that we really like to talk about, is how space is at the foundation of the entire geospatial and space industry ecosystem. So just to cite an example or give a context, if you look at the space infrastructure sector, we see that space infrastructure focuses on PNT, on Earth observation, and on communication. These data points are central to how the geospatial industry evolves and how geospatial industry uses data and integrates it with the different workflows that we have today, be it building information modeling, SCADA, enterprise resource solutions, business intelligence solutions, and that's how we come to finally a knowledge application. Given the focus that there is a need for knowledge today, we see that the market is going to be significantly driven by how the national geospatial agencies, which are the national mapping agencies, geological survey agencies, space agencies, how their role is transforming every single year as we move ahead. So earlier on, if you look at the role of national mapping agencies or the national geospatial agencies, it was traditionally to collect data and to provide this data to all the stakeholders. But today, when we look at their role, it has evolved to become a more regulatory, a more authoritative role. They guide the entire national geospatial ecosystem. And that is a transition that we have seen post-COVID that is shaping how the geospatial industry grows. One very other interesting thing that we have seen in the market today is the recognition of socio-economic benefits of transitioning from a geospatial, from an STI to a GKI enabled by the integrated geospatial information framework that my colleague Oishik spoke about. If we look at nations today, they are increasingly realizing and ensuring they capture the socio-economic impact of how geospatial knowledge is critical to the functioning of their economy and society. And that is leading to a multiplier, a force multiplier effect in terms of the usage of geospatial knowledge across different sectors, across different applications, by all stakeholders involved, including government, users, policymakers, citizens, as well as non-governmental organizations. Almost all stakeholders that you look at today, everybody uses geospatial knowledge for decision making. One of the other key drivers, when we see that the market, when we see how the industry is growing to grow from 726 billion in 2026 to 1.19 trillion in 2030, that is almost a CAGR growth of 12.5%, is that there is an increasing demand for real-time advanced analytics, automation, and geospatial integration in enterprise systems, all very critical to building a geospatial knowledge infrastructure. Apart from that, if we are talking about geospatial knowledge, one of the most significant aspects that we have seen, again coming more post-COVID, is the increasing digitalization and workflow integration in new and emerging verticals. So my colleague mentioned a couple of examples from traditional sectors as well as from emerging sectors, right, like retail and commerce, as well as banking, finance, and insurance. But today, when we look at geospatial knowledge implementation, we're looking at healthcare, we're looking at gaming, we're looking at sectors which were probably using geospatial in some form or the other, but the advanced knowledge application that we see today is significant. So as I mentioned, the kind of market opportunities and the sectoral opportunities that is growing in terms of application of geospatial, it moves from urban infrastructure and smart cities to logistics operations, to climate and environment monitoring, defense and security, energy and utilities. I would say that you name a sector today, it will have a geospatial knowledge application, wherein geospatial knowledge will be at the foundation of ensuring that that application actually creates some socio-economic benefit for the users in place. But what that has also done is, and what we are seeing today, I think all of us are aware that we are undergoing as an ecosystem, not just geospatial ecosystem, but as a world, we are going through significant amount of challenges. We're looking at societal challenges, we're looking at technological challenges, geopolitical, economical, environmental challenges. So right from misinformation to disinformation, we're looking at technology, digital divide, we're looking at so many challenges, and these challenges are also being faced by the geospatial and space industry today. So if we look at the complex regulatory environments, if we look at cybersecurity threats, workforce skill gaps, social and ethical backlash, interoperability challenges, intellectual property risks, geospatial data sovereignty, if you look at unequal digital access, like I mentioned, digital divide, there's so many challenges that we geospatial and space industry ecosystem faces today. And what that is also going to do is that is also going to recalibrate the scale of the market opportunity. So at Geospatial World, we did a kind of assessment on what is the kind of impact it would the market would showcase in the next 5 years if we look at a positive geopolitical shift or a negative geopolitical shift. So I think if you look at the world scenario today, if you look at how the geopolitical scenario is emerging, we see that there is going to be a significant reduction in reliance on foreign-owned platforms across country. Governments all across the world, especially if you look at how the trade barriers are coming in, if you look at the war-like situation that most countries are today. Somebody mentioned in one of the conferences, 56 war-like situations are currently in the world. We see that there's going to be an increasing government investments in sovereign geospatial and space capabilities. We definitely are seeing mainstreaming of geospatial across industry and boost to indigenous solutions and system integrators. So when we look at that kind of a positive geopolitical shift, we see that the market might expand to a certain level and might be at a $1.3 trillion opportunity. But while we have looked at the positive, it's also important to look at the negatives. So there is a pro and con situation here. And when we're looking at the negative impact of how the world is functioning today, and what are the priority areas in many countries, we see that there is a subdued public investment in terms of geospatial funding or IT funding in general to many national mission programs. We see that there is restriction in cross-border data sharing. There is deferment to modernization programs and technology procurement. And of course, there's limited cross-border R&D collaboration. So if I just have to take an example here, there could be a positive cross-border R&D collaboration also, which could be an impact of the geopolitical shift that we see today, which could help some countries. But on the other side, the other countries might face this as a challenge. So these are some of the risks that we as an economy, we as the world economy face today. And what this does is this risks necessitate that we transition towards a knowledge-driven geospatial ecosystem. So whatever challenges that we face today together. So if we face challenges together, it's very important to also ensure that the solutions we come out with are also found together and implemented together. So this is something that is part of the Future of Geospatial Ecosystem document by the United UN GKI, wherein three main reasons were identified why we need to transition towards a knowledge-driven geospatial ecosystem. The first being unified solutions to global problems, second being equitable access to knowledge on demand, and third being bridging the geospatial digital divide. So if you look at all of these three reasons, the three reasons on why we need to transition towards a knowledge-driven geospatial ecosystem, these three solve most of the risks that we face today if addressed at a national level. Of course, there are many other factors that could be involved, but from a geospatial standpoint of view, these three are three critical reasons that we have. What that also ensures is, and what that also gives us, is the future of geospatial ecosystem. So what we project and what we advocate for is that it's time for us to move from data to knowledge. That is, we move from hindsight to foresight. We move from not forgetting about the data, but looking at data in such a manner where we start predicting, knowing why and knowing how. It becomes analytical, it becomes a decision-making tool in such a manner that we understand the associated context of the data, and we provide it as a solution to all the global challenges or the problems that we as a society face. So the transition from data to knowledge is how we define the geospatial knowledge infrastructure as a concept. And this is driven by multiple factors, some of them I mentioned before, which is evolving role of federal geospatial data providers, advancing user demands, focus on strategic national priorities and SDGs, digital technology advancements. But what that also means is that we are here talking about the transition from moving from spatial data infrastructure to geospatial knowledge infrastructure, enabled beautifully by the concept of the integrated geospatial information framework. So when we just to spend a little bit on this framework that we have here, if we look at spatial data infrastructure was pretty much data centric, but when we talk about GKI, we are here looking at a knowledge centric framework. We're looking at transitioning from a centralized system to a distributed system. We're looking from a 2D representation to a 4D, 5D representation. We're looking from not focusing on the supply side of geospatial data and information, but we are looking at more from the demand side, which is where the user stakeholders become critical to GKI, because that is where the value impact is delivered. We're looking at bringing not just professional users into the foray. We're talking about bringing together stakeholders, broader stakeholder groups, right from bringing in the users, economists, statisticians, citizens, bringing together an ecosystem to build the GKI framework. And all of this is enabled by the 9 strategic pathways of the integrated geospatial information framework: governance and institutions, policy and legal, financial, data, innovation, standards, partnerships, capacity and education, communication and engagement. When we look at this entire ecosystem, STI to GKI, here we're also looking at what are going to be the enablers and facilitators. So commercialization and industrialization, public-private partnership, the geopolitical world order, development of sovereign assets and focus on sovereign assets, apart from the technologies, the innovations that are taking place in IoT, in blockchain, digital twin enterprises, all of this together is going to enable the transition that we want to foresee from SDI to GKI. So now that we have this in place, it's also very important to understand why the Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index 2025. At Geospatial World, we started doing the Geospatial Readiness Index in 2017. The first edition was in 2017 because as an organization, we realized that there was nothing available in the market at that time which assessed how countries are maturing in terms of geospatial readiness, in terms of geospatial adoption, in terms of the policy frameworks. However, in 2020, when we came out with the geospatial knowledge infrastructure as a concept, and we started discussing how we need to transition from data to knowledge, that is when we realized that even our framework of geospatial readiness needs to transition to incorporate the knowledge aspect. So we came out with the first GKI Readiness Index in 2022 at the UNWGIC Congress held in Hyderabad. And we recently released the Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index 2025 in Madrid in Spain, wherein we've had certain methodological updates, and we also realized that there have been significant progress by countries when it comes to how they are maturing in terms of Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index. So a quick go through into the architecture. My colleague 𝐿𝐞𝐲 already mentioned that we are focusing on 5 pillars here. We're looking at infrastructure, institutional capacity, industry ecosystem, policy landscape, and user adoption. So when we look at infrastructure, we're focusing on geospatial infrastructure. We've been traditionally focusing on geospatial and space infrastructure because they have formed the core part of how we view the role of national mapping agencies and the national geospatial agencies and all in terms of Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Readiness Index. However, as part of our analysis this year, we are very pleased to include the hydrographic infrastructure as part of our Readiness Index architecture, understanding that it is a very, very critical component when we look at the geospatial knowledge infrastructure as one of the most important pillars. The second is the institutional capacity. While institutional capacity here has been assessed on 2 different levels. One is geospatial institutional readiness, and the second is knowledge ecosystem readiness. So here we are looking more from an academia and research point of view, the spending on advanced geospatial artificial intelligence, space-based education, as well as training and research and development capabilities. The third and a very important pillar is the industry ecosystem pillar, which is developing industry capacity, incubation and entrepreneurship frameworks, innovation and government efficiency. So here we're looking at the export and the kind of capabilities when it comes to the local industry, as well as the capabilities of the local industry to also cater to the markets outside the country, as well as also to their local domestic needs. We are also looking at the import and export matrix. We're also looking at the kind of funding and investment that is happening in this context. And the fourth pillar, which is the policy landscape pillar, which is where we have actually seen a significant amount of change from 2022 to 2025, is the policy landscape, where we have focused on the geospatial and space policy, geospatial integration and cross-sector policies, integrated digital innovation and data governance policies, which includes your AI, S&T policy, science and technology policy, ICT policy, IoT, those kind of policy frameworks as well, because those frameworks also define and enable the geospatial knowledge infrastructure as a concept. And fifth, and probably the most important pillar, as you might have understood, is from this SDI to GKI transition, is the user adoption pillar, which is where the value impact is driven. Here we're looking at geospatial application and knowledge application assessment. We've looked at user digital innovation readiness and digital transformation and application. So we have done assessment of multitude of case studies across sectors. We've interacted with sectors, with sectoral stakeholders on their level of maturity, which we define as the GKI workflow integration maturity model. So this particular workflow integration maturity model also forms a fundamental aspect of our geospatial knowledge infrastructure concept, where we move from mapping and visualization to digital twin enterprise, which is where a country stands, whether it is at stage 3, that is spatial computing and predictive modeling, or whether it is at digital twin enterprise. Depending on where the country stands, that is the kind of maturity the country has in terms of geospatial knowledge integration at a global level. So when we look at the infrastructure GKI Readiness Index, we have it represents a critical instrument for assessing a nation's maturity in developing, managing, and utilizing geospatial knowledge for policy formulation, economic development, and national resilience. In 2022, we assessed 50 countries, and this year we assess 75 countries. We have more than 100 plus parameters and more than 350 plus sub-parameters, which are all present in the report. And why GKI Readiness Index matters? Because as we look at the situation today that where we are in, it has become very important for us to know where we are in terms of our geospatial readiness. It helps us guide strategic policy making. It enables cross-sector geospatial integration. It helps us focus on enhancing and enabling our socio-economic development at a much, much faster pace. When we look at the top three GKI ranked countries by region, of course, if I just look at the top 3 countries, then we have United States, United Kingdom, and Germany, who are at the forefront of GKI Readiness Index. We have certain outliers as well. If we look at the 2022 Readiness Index and 2025 Readiness Index, we see South Korea jumping from 25th position to 4th position. We see the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia going up from 32 to 9. And we see India moving up from 27 to 15. Of course, there are significant different reasons on why these countries have made that jump. There have been policy reforms. There have been different national mission mode programs that have come into foray when it comes to why these countries, specifically the ones which have moved up the ranking chart, have gone up. But however, I would also put in a word of caution that we shouldn't directly compare the 2022 to 2025 readiness indices, because the methodology has evolved significantly, even the parameters and the sub-parameters that we have assessed. One of the other things that I would like to throw light on is the Geospatial Knowledge Infrastructure Tactical Readiness Index 2025. So this is something that we have been discussing over a period of time, especially with the pandemic and with the current situations in terms of war-like situations that most of the countries face today, and in every part of the world. We realize that there is a need for countries to be prepared, for governments, defense stakeholders, and strategic analysts to be prepared in terms of how ready they are in terms of their sovereign, resilient, and strategically autonomous space and geospatial capabilities. Because this is also critical to both national security and global strategic influence. We have seen recently, if you look at Russia-Ukraine war, or if you look at the recent India-Pakistan situation, we have seen these kind of capabilities are mission critical in terms of tactical preparedness. So we are talking about space sovereignty, tactical geo-int infrastructure, geodetic infrastructure, operational resilience, industrial innovation, and sovereign capacity. And when we look at all of these 5 pillars which we have defined in terms of assessing the tactical readiness index, we see that countries who rank higher in the tactical readiness index are often very well prepared in terms of addressing any issue when it comes to their sovereignty or their resiliency. So if we look at why tactical geospatial readiness index matters, we are looking at how does the country have a capability to collect and process high frequency satellite imagery. Does the country have the capability or has its own geodetic infrastructure in place? For example, this is often a question that we have I think we have seen and we have failed to answer, is that what if tomorrow the United States shuts down its GPS? What is how will stakeholders use the PNT information that they get from GPS? Some countries are very well prepared in terms of addressing this particular challenge. Other countries may not be. So having that preparedness is critical in today's situation. It's critical when we're looking at sovereignty as a key aspect of how countries want to develop. So, and this is my last slide. So, if you look at GKI Tactical Readiness Index, we have 5 countries that stand out. Of course, United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan, who have shown tactical readiness in terms of space capability, in terms of joint infrastructure, in terms of defense integration, and in terms of having their strong industrial ecosystems as well. One may question why isn't Europe in the picture, but we haven't taken Europe as a region. As a region, yes, but at a country level, when we start assessing the tactical readiness index, because tactical readiness matters at a country level, these are some of the 5 countries. These are top 5 countries who are tactically ready to address any challenges that they might face in terms of sovereignty or resilience issues. So if all in all, if we look at the GKI Readiness Index, or geospatial knowledge infrastructure as a concept, it is about moving from data to knowledge, and probably in the future towards wisdom. It is about solving and building a scenario resilience, moving from hindsight to foresight, moving from a scenario and transitioning to a scenario where we are talking about knowledge applications for each stakeholder group that is there, and ensuring that countries are mature, countries are ready in order to not only be tactically ready, but also in order to develop their economies, because geospatial, as we all understand, is fundamental to how we look at the growth of the world economy and society. Thank you.
Thank you once again, Ananya, for that comprehensive overview of the GKI Readiness Index 2025. Your presentation not only provided us with a clear understanding of the current geospatial landscape and the factors driving national readiness, you also explained the complex concepts with such clarity, so that people, regardless of the background, can easily grasp the nuances of the current geospatial landscape and the key drivers. Now, with that, we'll move on to the next session, which is the question answer session. We now open the floor to questions. Let's bring in as many voices we can. If you have a question, we request you to kindly comment. Simply raise your digital hand or drop it in the chat. I will cue you in. All questions are welcome. No query is too basic. Yeah, so we have the first question. Miranda Gallo is asking, what methodological upgrades distinguish GKI RI 2025 from the earlier reports?
All right, I think that's a great question. As I mentioned in my talk, we started off the geospatial readiness framework in 2017, and the GKI as a concept was, of course, discussed and delivered in 2020 and 2021. If you just compare the last readiness index with this one, I think from a methodological point of view, we changed. The first step for us was to identify the parameters that we were assessing in terms of data collection, in terms of what were the parameters that we would like to assess. So just to give a quick example, I think if you look at the 2022 readiness index in terms of the policy pillar, the policy pillar was still there, and we were still assessing the geospatial and space policy framework. However, this year, when we assessed the geospatial and policy framework, we went a step ahead. We deep dive into the geospatial and space policy framework, beyond just moving beyond just having a policy or not, but looking at it from the point of view of, does it address the key components of geospatial knowledge infrastructure? We also added one specific parameter of whether the policy formulation that is currently been happening, when we look at this domain, is it driven by is it a data driven policy making? For example, we looked at the studies that countries might have conducted in terms of coming to these policies. So one was, of course, looking at the pillars, like I also mentioned, including the hydrographic infrastructure pillar. Similar additions have been made across all pillars in order to ensure that our framework, or the architecture that we have in terms of GKI, is at a stage where it only evolves for the better, and that's going to continue as we move forward. But when we look at the kind of methodological frameworks that we adopted, so this year we had an integrated systems dynamic modeling that we did. We looked at the interdependence upon indicators. So often when we are doing ranking exercises, you're looking at each indicator in silo. But geospatial knowledge infrastructure as a concept, I don't think that each indicator could be in a silo. So at this point, we looked at all the interdependence among all the indicators. So, for example, looking at the feedback loops between policy coherence and private sector innovation, that is one of the interdependence example that I could give. The second thing that we also did was we employed advanced data techniques. We looked at Monte Carlo simulations for probabilistic scenario modeling. Earlier iterations of the readiness index relied primarily on having a deterministic scoring. But however, the 2025 index, we used Monte Carlo simulations, which account for looking at variability across different input variables that we have. So there were more than, I think, 500 plus simulations that we did in terms of the data, in terms of the weightages, in terms of the rankings, in terms of the scores to come to the final ranking that we have today. And last, we had a dual track indexing, which is we launched the tactical dimension. So one is of course, the strategic knowledge infrastructure readiness index, and the second one was the tactical readiness index. So we bifurcated the readiness index in such a manner that we looked at the long-term capabilities and the near-term tactical implementation. So this, I believe, this dual lens can allow countries to be evaluated not only just on their infrastructure capabilities and vision, but also on their operational execution capabilities, which we have addressed in the tactical readiness index part. So these are some of the upgrades that we made in terms of methodology, in terms of even how we are looking at enabling more granular country profiling, and looking at more higher predictive accuracy, and looking at more actionable and grounded, robust foresight modeling, instead of just doing a deterministic scoring, which limits if you're not taking the interdependence into factor.
Okay. So we have a second question, which talks about South Korea and Saudi Arabia, which entered the top 10 in GKI Readiness Index 2025. Which shared policy, institutional, industry, or adoption factors explain their leap?
All right. It is very, like I mentioned, even in my outlier slide, I think South Korea moving from 25th to 4th, and Saudi Arabia going from 32nd to 9th in the GKI Readiness Index, that they demonstrate how the divergent historical baselines that were there, and how they have now converged into a set of high impact accelerators. So a couple of things that happened across both. Of course, my first and foremost focus is going to be the centralized policy coordination. If you look at both both South Korea and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we're looking at Korea's National Spatial Data Infrastructure Committee, as well as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's General Authority for Survey and Geospatial Information, GEOSA. both the nations established top-down interministerial governance bodies dedicated to developing geospatial strategy, and this enabled coherent policy orchestration across for the use of geospatial across sectors. So centralized policy coordination is something that, even though the policy pillar does not have that high a weightage, but it definitely had a significant impact in these countries rising up into the foray. The other thing that these policies also did was that it enabled cross sectoral data sharing. So if I just take the example of Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we currently see that the data is being shared across all ministerial departments, and this is the same true for India as well, because India came out with their National Geospatial Policy 2022 as well as the guidelines for geospatial data in 2021. It has enabled data sharing across all stakeholders ecosystem. So policy coordination becomes a very important factor. The second important thing here, I believe, is the mission-oriented public investment. So if you look at the Vision 2030 document of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as well as the investments that is being made in Korea with regards to satellite constellations and digital twin infrastructure, they have these mission-oriented public investments and programs have enabled the advanced use of geospatial knowledge in terms of the workflow integration model that we saw. And again, the same thing true holds for India as well. When we look at the national mission mode programs that we have today, all of them are at an advanced, visualizing an advanced application of geospatial knowledge, right from digital twin to a national digital twin at this point of time. The third thing that we saw was significant public-private collaboration models. Both countries, again, I'll bring in India here as well, because it is a very significant outlier. All these three countries both deployed strategic public-private partnerships. I wouldn't call it a public-private partnership, but more sort of collaboration that was happening between the public and the private sector, and also even the citizens, to stimulate innovation. So we looked at, if you just take up the example of Saudi Arabia's NEOM project, it actually serves as a geospatial sandbox integrating real-time spatial analytics. And similarly, if we study a few case studies in Korea, where they're not only using AI, but they're moving to advanced use of digital twin solutions, that and working with the private sector to do that, and enabling innovation in the private sector, that is one of the other things that has driven both countries to move up the ranking. And I think last, like I mentioned, user adoption. When we look at the user adoption that is happening in most of the countries who have moved up, who were an outlier in this year's Readiness Index, even though there cannot be a direct comparison, the user adoption of geospatial knowledge has significantly advanced in most of these countries. So while, of course, there could be a question whether that innovation is coming from the is an indigenous innovation, or is it innovation that is being imported into the country, but the adoption is significantly higher. So if you look at any of the giga projects that are happening in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, all of them, most of the projects are actually talking about implementation of AI, digital twins. There are digital twin models which are already ready. Similarly, if you look at South Korea is one of the most advanced nation when it comes to developing digital twin of cities, and digital twins in construction and infrastructure sector. So many examples in terms of how the maturity has gone from not being just a mapping and visualization, but moving towards digital twin enterprises, or somewhere between in stage 3, which is the spatial modeling and predictive modeling. So user adoption, which is where we have given significant weightage in terms of estimating the readiness index, that's where these countries score significantly higher.
Okay, we have another question which talks about India's rank. So we have seen that India ranks 4th in tactical sovereignty, but 15th overall. What strategic actions can be taken, to align these standings?
Yes, so India is a tactically ready country when we talk about sovereignty in terms of our geospatial and space capabilities. We have our space agency is definitely one of the well-renowned space agencies of the world, Indian Space Research Organization, and if we look at our practical ranking reflects that we have robust indigenous capabilities today, be it in satellite manufacturing, launch infrastructure, and even in terms of spatial data governance. So even if you look at the policy part of it, the National Geospatial Policy, the Indian Space Policy 2023, we're looking at democratization and commercialization of the geospatial and space industry, but we have a very vision oriented goal in terms of what we want to achieve when we talk about geospatial. However, of course, there are gaps, and there are gaps when we look at the overall readiness, and it can be largely attributed to the constraints in institutional coherence, in data democratization, and commercial scaling. I think we're doing pretty well when it comes to the space sector, but when it comes to the geospatial sector, there is still significant potential in terms of how that sector can definitely grow. When we look at a couple of things that are very foundational to the infrastructure component is having a national base map, right? And India has recently launched a national geospatial mission to develop that base map. So we are still not there. Probably by the next index, we will have the national base map ready. But a couple of strategic alignments that can be done, and this is something that we have been talking about, is we could probably focus more on institutional streamlining and interoperability mechanisms. There are currently, even if we look at the policy frameworks, or if we look at the implementation of the policy frameworks, we see that there are overlapping responsibilities amongst the key geospatial organizations that we have, and of course, lack of policy clarity in the private sector as well as in the user sector in many cases. When we look at the data infrastructure of the country, while India has liberalized access to remote sensing data, to geospatial data, and is focused on building robust national geospatial data registries and a unified geospatial platform, this is going to be important, and this needs to be taken up at speed if we want to reach to a stage where we are talking about real-time geospatial knowledge. The third aspect, I think, is commercial ecosystem enablement. I think a significant impetus has been provided not only by the private sector or venture capitalist firms, but by the government themselves. I think if anybody looks at the last two budget announcements that have happened for the country, both the budget announcements and probably the one before as well had a geospatial and a space component. One was focusing on how we can have an urban geospatial land record system, and the second was allocating 1,000 crore fund, venture capitalist fund, to the space sector. So while all of this is great, but we still need targeted fiscal instruments focused more on the geospatial side. Like I said, space sector is something that is doing significantly well in the country, but we really need to also provide the same kind of impetus to the geospatial sector. And last, I think this entire industry ecosystem, this entire geospatial and space ecosystem is just not at a national level. It requires an international standard alignment. So India's data formats and platforms need to be interoperable with international geospatial standards. I know Survey of India, our national mapping agency, has been doing significant amount of work towards enabling smoother integration into into ensuring that we are aligned. But there needs to be a much more focus area. And last, I think we need to really shift from an infrastructure first approach to a user centric ecosystem model, and which is where we will be talking which is where we are talking about moving from data to moving to knowledge, which is moving to a user centric ecosystem model, where we are talking about service delivery, where we are talking about scaling the applications that we have in terms of generating value benefit to the stakeholders.
Okay, I think we have just enough time to squeeze in one more question, like very brief, maybe, if you want to keep it. Like, how does the new tactical readiness index shift the space and geospatial sovereignty debate. I think the second part of the question has already been answered. So if you could take the first part, that would be really nice.
So I think I briefly covered the first part also, but the introduction of the Tactical Readiness Index, it marks a significant evolution in how geospatial maturity is assessed. It shifts the focus from abstract strategic intent to a more operationalized or sovereign-based readiness index. So here we are looking at operational sovereignty as a competitive differentiator. We are looking at decoupling of strategy and readiness, which is where we mean that there are countries with an advanced strategic framework in place where implementation is significantly could be significantly high, but they lag in deployment. And the Tactical Readiness Index highlights that policy vision alone is insufficient often if there are not executable architectures, which is where we move to why we need a law when we talk about geospatial law. The other thing I think is today we're looking at sanction regimes, we're looking at sovereign cloud initiatives, we're looking at AI sovereignty. So the Tactical Readiness Index definitely provides a diagnostic tool for countries seeking to reduce geopolitical exposure, which I think in today's time is very critical, and it's important for it's important to build autonomous geospatial stacks. And if you just look at it from an overall GKI Tactical Readiness Index point of view, I think it is a timely construct for governments who want to navigate through this fragmented and bifurcated global order, and where autonomy is needed when we look at geospatial systems, and autonomy is critical and prerequisite to strategic relevance of countries and for their geospatial readiness.
Thank you, Ananya, for those insightful and detailed responses. Your presentation truly brought the data to life, and your thoughtful answers have set a strong foundation for our next segment of our conversation. We appreciate the clarity that you provided. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ashik. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, with that, we'll transition to the next half of our conversation. Now, as I promised you at the start, that we have someone with 3 decades of experience to enrich our discussions. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Greg Scott, Executive Director of the SDG Data Alliance at 𝐊𝐿𝐞𝐲 Foundation. Introduction of Dr. Jacob. He needs no introduction, as he's a global leader in geospatial information management and its role in sustainable development. His work at the UN and with various international organizations has been instrumental in advancing the use of geospatial data for societal benefit. Dr. Scott's extensive background includes significant contributions to United Nations Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, advocating for its adoption worldwide to enhance geospatial capabilities. His leadership at the SDG Data Alliance focuses on leveraging data to achieve sustainable development goals, making him a key voice in today's conversation. Dr. Scott, we are honored to have you with us. You will be sharing his perspectives on GKI and IGIF and their foundational role in sovereignty, growth, and inclusive societies.
Thank you, Ashik. Nice to be here, and thank you for inviting me along. Thank you for those lovely words. Yeah, I think we've all been part of this journey over the years, that's for sure. Good to be here.
Dr. Scott, since time is of the essence, I'll directly jump into the first question. So I wanted to know, like, how does a UN Integrated Geospatial Information Framework underpin geospatial knowledge infrastructure, and what are the true benefits of fully integrating GKI?
Yeah, thank you. And I think Ananya's done a brilliant job in describing some of the journey with the UN IGIF and the GKI over the last 5 to 6 years, and now how we get more towards the metrics and indices around a readiness index. But I thought I might just start by providing a bit of historical context for those that may not be so familiar, and talk a little bit about the relevance of this digital transformation, this top technology and innovation that we see a lot more now when we think about countries and their readiness. And particularly over the last few years, as the UNIGIF and the GKI have both evolved and matured somewhat together. And it really comes back to some of the challenges we've already spoken about in what we need to address, whether we're talking about poverty reduction, food security, climate change, disasters, energy, land, supply chains, et cetera, and right now, when we think about the UN Ocean Conference that's been convened in Nice in France, and we've literally just finished a side event there just an hour or so ago on data, is that we've been reminded by many leaders around the world of a lot of these challenges that are still in front of us, particularly when we think about small island states. All of these things require a common element to really understand, and that's location. We know that. As geospatial people and geographers, we understand that. We understand geography, and when we talk often now about small island states, it even includes geographic remoteness. So the application of digital geospatial infrastructure has now got a much more increasing role to play. We're seeing more challenges. We've seen it being applied in more developing countries. And we're seeing the need for data and technology and frameworks and methods and capabilities to help solve these huge problems that we're seeing around the world. And so we talk about this idea of striving to make data, authoritative data, any data in some cases, available. And at the same time, how do we do that when we think about all of these disruptors around transformation, the fourth industrial revolution, all of these sort of technology innovations? But what does that mean when we get to a community level, and how do we appease that appetite and expectation for more data? So when we think about these capabilities or strategies, it's no longer possible to think about data or a strategy within an organization, within an agency, within a government in isolation. The idea of doing this as a single entity doesn't really ring true anymore, particularly when we think about the financial challenges a lot of us have. And that's sort of why the UNIGIF was created. It was created as an integrated framework. It provides a basis for strengthening and maximizing geospatial information. And as we sort of saw in Ananya's presentation, she had the IGIF as that bridge between our traditional SDIs that we've used over many decades, now evolving for 4 decades, and the GKI of the future, in this idea of moving from data to knowledge. And really, the IGIF becomes that integrated frame, and it is a framework, it is a methodology, it is a guide, and it uses principles and a lot of pathways, strategic pathways, to help countries through that process. But what we're also seeing when we think about all those development challenges on the other side of the coin, and we think about particularly cities and digital infrastructure applications in the areas of energy and waste and water and consumption and land use and comms and supply chains, construction, telecoms, all of these things that are starting to move more into even BIM and smart cities, AI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these emerging realities are sort of starting to get tangled in our needs in terms of development. So I think this is where this idea of an emerging knowledge infrastructure that the GKI brings to us, how it brings to the broader geospatial dimension to our digital ecosystem, sort of not only about our challenges, but bringing in not only where we live, but also the infrastructure and the services and the capabilities that are in cities and urban environments that we also use. So it's really about how that ecosystem gets more broader, how geography itself is changing more into applications and analytics and modeling and infrastructure. And as we keep saying, through to knowledge. So that's where I see this benefit when we think about moving to the past, into the future, thinking more about not only thematic fundamental data areas, but also new industry areas as well that are often using the same sort of information, but not always aware. And that's really about this other element I'll just finish off with here is how we move up this data value chain. Ananya made a really pertinent point when she said that knowledge is at the center of the data value chain. And it is, because really what we are starting with sometimes is just data. It's just bits and bytes. And we convert that into information and understanding and insights. And out of that, this is where we generate our knowledge. But what becomes more important, and getting to the point of that pyramid around wisdom, is then how we use that knowledge for making decisions. But beyond that, taking action as a result of those decisions and ensuring that that action has positive impact. And I think that's the journey we're on in our new ecosystem. And the GKI and the IGIF and all of the technologies that we now have before us are helping us in that journey, and particularly for developing countries so that we can enable them to be leapfroggers with some of this sort of technology.
Most countries, like when they try to implement something like this, they look at, like how it can directly bolster a nation's sovereignty, their economic competitiveness, and societal resilience. So how can countries make informed decisions to bolster all of these aspects?
Yeah, good question. And I think we've already seen a couple of questions come in about these, about some of these issues, and particularly when we think now beyond data for data's sake and thinking more about, okay, what's its benefit, what's its economic value, how can it apply to creating resilience, particularly societal resilience, but also ensuring socioeconomic growth and resilience in that area as well. I think we should first recognize that where we are in the geospatial community, it's a very, very cross-cutting sector. And it's in a very dynamic state of change and evolution. We've even been talking now for the last 2 or 3 years as we've thought about the IGIF and then the GKI and now towards this future geospatial ecosystem. What does all of that look like? And we don't really know, I would suggest at the moment. We're on that path, and I think the last 5 to 6 years has really moved us in that direction. And now we're having real conversations around things like the problems and the solutions and the value proposition and benefits, societal, economic, environmental, that need to go with that. So that's one part of it. We're evolving as an ecosystem, but at the same time, our sectors are evolving and our industry sectors are evolving the same way, but also countries are the same. They're evolving at different levels of evolution and maturity. And often they're doing that in isolation. And historically, they've been doing that in isolation, and they're not necessarily understanding how they can compare with each other and across countries and peers. They don't often know what different strengths and weaknesses and learnings and experiences may be there. And this is where I think the GKI readiness has the ability to not only get a better understanding of where a nation or a country or even a region may be, it actually gives them a much better understanding of how they relate with each other. And if we use the example of the small island states, or we might use the African states, is they get a much better understanding of what their combined challenges may be rather than some of their isolated challenges. So I see the thing I like about the Readiness Index is it gives us a bit of a scorecard, and it gives a benchmark in terms of progress. And it really helps countries, as we've seen in the questions, sort of say, well, how come we've gone from there to here? And how do we get from here to somewhere else? And how do we move? And how do those aspirations change? And I think that's a really, really good thing. And we're seeing now I will say, when I was in the UN back in 2020, when we started to have the discussions around the GKI and the Readiness Index, there was a bit of apprehension around the idea of countries comparing each other. It wasn't, for us in the UN system, having that sort of scorecard when you're trying to compare highly developed countries and economies against developing economies, and the socioeconomic disparity and the digital divide that happens there. But now that's changed, because I think where we're seeing now, and Ananya's mentioned some of this, is that we're seeing a much wider acceptance here, because the scorecards have improved immensely in terms of the indices and the metrics. Now, I think now we're over 100 of those. And so when we compare those to, say, 5 years ago, they're much more mature, they're a lot more richer. We've got the backside of the past, and we've got insights into the future. So I think that gives a lot of confidence in where we're going forward. And just to finish off, is that in what I'm seeing, and I mentioned this when the Readiness Index was launched in Madrid earlier this year, is that what's so unique about this is that it is really comprehensive in its representation integration of the modeling. And we've already had a discussion around Monte Carlo simulations and these sort of techniques that give us a much more robust outcome. But I think the good thing I like about it, that it's bringing in more technology trends, it's bringing in more business directions, and it's really starting to look at these risks and challenges, including sovereignty. But it's taking a more regional and global view at some of these as well, because just like our interconnectivity around the world itself, we don't do things in isolation. What we do has ripple effects. What we do has dependencies and interdependencies, and getting a better understanding of that in terms of how we backcast and how we forecast and how we do this brings a lot more understanding. And from that, as we know, a lot more knowledge into what we can and should be doing into the future, and particularly when we apply it to some of our biggest challenges. That's what I really like about it.
You talked about workflow, and workflow integration is a huge part of like the GKI Readiness Index. So how do you think countries can rapidly advance through GKI workflow integration maturity models, and what actions can government take to facilitate the process?
Yeah, I was thinking there's a good little acronym for that one. Another acronym is the GKI Workflow Integration Maturity Model, the GKI WIM. It does serve as a really good blueprint for advancing the integration of geospatial capabilities across. I see it as an integrator, but it's integrating geospatial capabilities, and it's doing it across organizational and ecosystem levels. So keyword integration of geospatial capability, integration of workflows, integration of operational actions, integration of enterprise and also organizations. So I see that process and the dimensions of that workflow integration is a really critical enabler for how we create a much better value of what we're doing, and how that brings more intelligence, as Ananya's been talking about, into our processes, into our planning, and into digital transformation, into digital twins, and where we evolve with some of this in the future. This really does help, or will help, countries and agencies in the future. It becomes more systematic, and at the most basic level, it could look at how we best represent our transition from, the past mapping agency organizations from our more siloed map-centric applications to a more integrated real-time anticipatory system, really about information at scale and decision-making at scale. But in saying that, it's a continuum. But in terms of taking action, And when we look at the readiness index, and we look at the transitions along those 5 stages of maturity that Ananya was speaking about, from this mapping and visualization through to the digital twin enterprise, and it has these characteristics and value propositions. So they outline a trajectory for countries and how they might enable this over time. But as organizations progress, their role in that transition and their role in that organizational integration is going to require a number of things. And that's not all going to be easy. It's going to require investments in infrastructure and data governance and resources and skill sets. And it's going to require leadership to be able to do it at the same time. And one of the big things around this is that when we look at these different metrics, is we first need to understand where countries stand, as I say, when we need to go from where we've been and where their beginning point is and where that aspiration and end point is and how quickly they want to get there. And that's going to be the key criteria, is knowing how you can apply those needs and those resources and that leadership to get the best value out of that along the timeline that they need to be able to make this work as best as they can. And that's really where getting a much better understanding of the readiness index and those particular parts that are critical to organizations to move some of this along. So that's how I see some of that. But at the end of the day, bringing in that organizational resource and scaling out.
That was a really insightful answer to that question, and we'd like to thank you so much for sharing, coming along and sharing your valuable insights with us. Your expertise on IGIF and its integration in GKI has provided a clear pathway for nations looking to enhance their geospatial capabilities and achieve sustainable development. Thank you so much for this engaging conversation, and it was really enriching learning from you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks, Abhishek. I really appreciate it.
With that, we enter the last half of our conversations. As we enter this final segment, I urge you to remember that geospatial knowledge infrastructure is the nervous system of digital economies and resilient governance. The 2025 index shows leadership, as was highlighted during our conversations, shows leadership isn't just about technology, it's about clear policies, agile institutions, widespread user adoption. This blend drives real geospatial innovation and sustainable growth worldwide. I want to emphasize a critical message that aligns with our global audience and the direction set by GKI Readiness Index 2025. To truly benefit from this tool, we must see it as much more than a ranking. The index can be a catalyst for real national level progress. So, what does this mean for all of us? The GKI Readiness Index is much more than a scorecard. It is a practical tool for honest self-assessment and strategic planning. Countries willing to operationalize the insights from the GKI Readiness Index 2025 must adopt a multi-pronged strategy. Countries should start by measuring geospatial readiness across all the 5 pillars that were highlighted. It helps them to see exactly where they stand and where they need to go next. With these insights, update your national policies, geospatial space strategy, make it actionable, measurable, and aligned with broader development goals. Assign clear roles, secure funding, set timelines, and put monitoring systems in place. Cross-sector coordination is imperative. Transitioning from SDI to GKI isn't just about upgrading technology. It's about building bridges between ministries, empowering citizens, enabling entrepreneurs, and fostering a culture of collaboration. Establish a national council or a task force with representation from government, academia, the private sector, and civil society to harmonize policies and strengthen data governance. Again, supporting innovation through sandboxes, grants, and incubation hubs will play a pivotal role. Building capacity for updating education, funding research, and investing in labs and global partnerships will be another important factor. Finally, integrate the index in your national dashboards for regular monitoring. Reassess constant monitoring and evaluation, reassess progress often. It's not a one-time exercise. It is a continuous journey, one that will ensure your nation is future ready with GKI at the heart of your digital transformation. So to understand how all of this looks into practice, we can look at a few examples. The Port of Rotterdam in Netherlands brings together real-time sensor vessel and weather data to streamline logistics and reduce congestion. This shows how advanced geospatial knowledge infrastructure can deliver economic and environmental benefits. Similarly, South Korea, through its platforms, use high-resolution spatial data and AI to power urban digital twins, supporting smart city planning and predictive management. These cases demonstrate when nations move beyond silos and invest in integrated, user-focused geospatial systems, the results can be transformative. As we reflect on this insight, it becomes clear why national-level commitment and strategic planning are essential. With this understanding, on behalf of Geospatial World, I would like to thank our Vice President Consulting, Ananya Narayan, for the keynote address and that wonderful presentation. And I would also like to thank Dr. Greg Scott for his global perspective, and to all of you listeners who tuned in and raised those sharp questions. Geospatial World will continue to provide platforms for knowledge sharing and collaboration in the geospatial domain. Stay tuned for future webinars, conferences, and publications. Thank you once again for joining us. Stay curious, stay geo-enabled, and good night.